It all starts with a girl who has lost her memory sitting on her bed and doesn't understand what's happening, surrounded by maids, a doctor, and her parents. The girl doesn't understand who all these people are standing next to. And besides, this is not Korea at all. The lady remembered that she was hit by a truck on the way, but for some reason, everything is fine with her body. The lady felt as if she had entered someone else's body, which meant that she had been reborn because of that truck. The girl decided to get up and go for a walk. She was walking in the garden where two maids were walking in front with laundry and baskets. They crashed and the laundry flew right onto the lady's face. The maids were horrified and began to ask for forgiveness and that they had committed a mortal sin, to which the lady answered them that everything was fine, because she herself was to blame for not being attentive. The maids looked at each other and did not understand what was going on at all. One maid began to ask why she was speaking to them so respectfully, and the second asked to speak to them more comfortably. Mrs. Ale. The lady was surprised and asked, Ale, is that her name? The maid answered that yes, the maids thought that it seemed that the rumors that she had lost her memory were true. The girl thought about it because her name was quite familiar to her. She remembered and shouted that, indeed, the maids jerked because of the lady's scream. She remembered that her name was Al, and her full name was Laela Ranmiken. She is one of the characters in the rom-com Love Blooming in the Desert. And despite the fact that the plot was simple, she enjoyed reading this book because of the author's amazing style. The girl realized that she had entered the body of a character from a book. Now she understands why the maids had such a reaction. Lady Ale was always cruel and ruthless towards those she didn't like. It's no wonder that no one liked her, and even her parents weren't particularly interested in her. Well, anyway, Al wasn't such a terrible villain, right? And why did the lady end up in the body of a villain? The maids noticed that the lady was talking to herself. They weren't sure that she was okay. Besides, she was getting married soon. The lady heard what they were saying and asked what wedding they were talking about. The maids told her that in 3 days she would marry the second prince of the Ren Empire. Ale was shocked that she could suddenly become a married woman. 3 days later, Ale and the prince are at their wedding. Because of the situation with the country, she has to get married, although the second prince was not mentioned in the book. The lady thought that he was the second prince who would not inherit the throne. Ale wondered if it was necessary to marry him in such a hurry in such a dead of night. She looked back and saw that there weren't even any guests. Even the emperor didn't come to his son's wedding. When Ale looked back at the prince, she noticed that he wasn't showing his face. She thought maybe he was that ugly. The lady sighed heavily, and no matter what, the marriage was forced. But she would have liked the prince to at least be handsome. After the wedding, Princess Ale came to her room. She was surprised that it was her room because she liked it quite a bit. In the princess's room, there was also her maid Lari. She asked her if she should prepare a place to sleep, but Ale answered her that there was no need because she could handle it herself. Be that as it may, even though Ale hasn't been here long, they've gotten used to being treated badly. She wonders where that man is. It looks like he wasn't going to get married of his own free will. It was such a shame for the princess to leave the bride all alone on the first night. The princess decided to ask the maid Lari when the prince would come. The maid answered her that the thing was that Ale thought that something had happened. So she asked her this. The maid answered her that it was possible that the prince would not come at all. Ale's reaction was shocked. She was simply petrified by this information and fell to her knees on the floor. The maid Lari immediately ran to lift her up. Ale, she thought that he left her immediately after he got married, although she thought that maybe it was for the best, because it's tiring to live with someone with whom your character may not be compatible. Then it would be better not to meet until they reach the end of their lives, she said. She thought. But it was too much when a month later he still hadn't shown up. The princess decided to ask Lari if the prince was really that ugly. She was very interested in this, so she wanted her to tell her. The maid thought about what to tell her. The lady said that she could put up with everything, but the ugliness really turned her off. Lari asked her if she hadn't heard anything about the prince. Ale didn't understand what she meant. The maid tells her that in truth she has never seen the prince in person, but they say that during the day he takes the form of a monster. To which Ale was in complete shock that her husband turned out to be a monster. She asked Lari again if he was really a monster, to which she replied that yes. The maid heard that they say that when the prince was still little, he was cursed by an evil wizard. So during the day, he always hides. So that's why he got married in such a hurry, Ale thought. She was surprised by this. And how could he marry his daughter with memory loss to a prince who turns into a monster? At night, when Ale was sleeping, she couldn't fall asleep. She opened her eyes and noticed that she had gotten up too early. She remembered that a month had already passed since she got into the book. She thought if she died, would she be able to return back? Ale put the blanket aside, got out of bed, and decided that since she didn't understand anything, she decided that first she needed to learn more about this place. The princess noticed that she had gone too far as she was already in the forest. Stopping, she saw a beautiful lake in front. Although she thought for a moment that the lake looked as if it was artificial. She wondered if this was really the imperial palace, because for some reason there were no guards. She shook her head in different directions and noticed that under the tree opposite there was a large, white, fluffy dog sitting. The princess screamed. She was scared of what it was. The dog woke up and started growling at her. She calmed herself down because it turned out to be just a dog. But she was surprised why he was growling like that, because it seemed to her that the dog did not want to bite her. She told him that she would not touch him, to which the dog calmed down and lay back down with her eyes closed. Ale thought that the dog was calm itself. But suddenly it seemed to her that because of some atmosphere, she felt somehow sluggish. The next morning, while Ale was sleeping, she heard someone crying and calling her. It seemed to her that the voice was somehow familiar. When she opened her eyes, it turned out that she had fallen asleep in the forest near the lake. And next to her, her maid Laurie was crying and calling her. And there were also guards next to the maid. The maid saw that Ale had woken up, took her by the hand, and asked what had happened to her. Laurie thought that someone had attacked her. Suddenly, the maid and the guard stood in front of her and began to almost shout, asking what had happened to her, who dared to do this, and that they would protect her. The princess wanted to answer, but she was interrupted and asked what the criminal looked like. She couldn't stand it and shouted that she just fell asleep. Everyone was in shock. When everything calmed down and it became clear, the maid thanked the guards for everything and ran after Ale. She was very glad that they found her. But she was scared because she thought that something had happened. It turned out that there was a big mess when they found out that the princess had disappeared somewhere. The princess remembered something and stopped. She turned to the maid Laurie and asked her if anyone in the palace kept a dog. The maid was puzzled and replied that no. Princess Ale then wondered what kind of dog she had seen the night before. The next night, the princess couldn't sleep again. She decided to take a lantern and go to that place again. She thought that she had nothing else to do, because she was walking at night to find that dog. She remembered what Laurie had said, that she had never seen dogs in their palace. Ale. I thought that maybe it was a dog from another palace. Before she could say anything else, she noticed someone near the lake. The princess saw a man standing near the lake and asked who he was. The man turned around and it turned out to be her husband. She was surprised. She asked if he was her husband, to which she did not answer. Ale thought that she did not even know her husband's name as soon as she wanted to say something. He immediately quickly ran away from that place. Princess Ale was in shock and did not understand what happened. She thought that it felt like she was just going to eat him. The next day, during the day, she was walking through the forest and wondering why he ran away when he saw her. He must have gotten used to avoiding people because of the evil wizard's curse, since during the day, he turns into a monster. Princess Ale shook her head and said that she didn't care about her husband right now. And while she was shaking her head and noticed the same sleeping dog she had seen recently, she suddenly squatted down next to him. She saw the dog's beautiful, fluffy fur and wanted to pet him. When she reached out to pet the dog, he suddenly woke up. Princess Ale did not expect this at all and was scared. She quickly removed her hand and screamed. The dog began to growl at her, but she raised both hands to her collarbone and told the dog that she would not touch her. While Princess Ale was shaking herself out, the servant Laurie came up behind her. She called her and realized that the princess was walking. She saw the dog and said that the princess was right. That, as she said, there was a dog in the palace. The princess asked. Yes, but how could she get here? Laurie thought, and said that maybe it was Mr. Schwerta's dog. Ale did not understand her and asked who it was. The maid replied that this was the name of the prince. Lady Ale told the maid that this dog needs to be taken to the castle because they can't just leave this dog like that. This dog is all alone and there is no one around. This reminded the princess of her situation. From now on, the princess called him Tofu because he was white. She brought him to the bathroom and started to bathe him and asked him if he liked his name, and said that if he wanted to live with her in the palace, then he needed to become much cleaner. The princess decided that she would bathe with Tofu. But Tofu quickly and sharply jumped out of the bath and began to scratch the doors. Princess Ale did not understand what was happening to him. And when Princess Ale wanted to approach Tofu, suddenly the doors to the bathroom flew out, and the maid Lari came out screaming what was going on. But when the maid Lari screamed Tofu ran out, the maid turned around and did not understand what happened. Princess Ale was shocked and said why she opened the door. They caught the tofu, and Princess Ale was wiping it off because it was wet and wondering what happened to it because it was so calm. She asked him if it was because he didn't like to swim and suddenly sneezed. At that moment, Lari had already arrived and heard that Ale had sneezed and asked if she had caught a cold. What Ale? She replied that no. What other cold could it be? She just sneezed, and the princess sneezed again after these words. Lari said that she urgently needed to change her clothes and go to bed. The princess agreed. The princess had already changed her clothes and went to bed, and could not fall asleep because of her cold. She thought that there were no modern hospitals here, which was very uncomfortable. Suddenly, she heard Tofu bark. She opened her eyes and saw that he was sitting next to her bed and looking at her. Ale told him that she didn't catch a cold because of him. So why was he looking at her like that then? Princess Ale patted the bed and asked Tofu if he wanted to climb in with her and sleep together. Tofu happily jumped onto the bed with the princess. She hugged Tofu and closed her eyes. She thought that Tofu seemed to understand what people were saying to him. Ale felt warm lying with him. She remembered that it turned out to be true that a dog's body temperature was higher than a human's. The morning came. Lady Ale was already waking up. She slowly opened her eyes, and when she opened them completely, she saw a sleeping man next to her. The princess was horrified. She did not understand what this man was doing to her on her bed. While Ale was in shock, the man woke up and opened his eyes. He stood up abruptly and quickly ran out of Princess Ale's room. She also stood up and shouted at him to stop, but he never stopped, but simply ran away silently. Lari ran up to them. She asked Ale if she was okay, because she heard that a pervert had broken into her room. The lady calmed her down, saying that she was okay. Lady Ale thought maybe it was because the palace looked abandoned, because knights or guards should be passing through here. But there was no one, after all. It is an empire. It can't be that they have a budget shortage. The princess decided to ask Lari who manages the palace budget. The maid thought about it and said that maybe the chamberlain does this. Ale did not understand who she meant because she had not seen him. The maid started to say that the thing is that she is relatively new here, so she can't give a straight answer. But in fact, before Ale arrived, the servants weren't having the best time. The princess asked, "Why?" "Because she is a villain." Lari immediately said that no, that's not true. The princess sat down to stroke the tofu and told the maid that there was no need to panic, that she actually wanted to meet the chamberlain. Lari. She said she would go and pass it on. While the princess and the maid were talking, Ale noticed that something happened to the tofu. She realized that he was unhappy with something. She asked about the palace management, but Tofu didn't react at all. The princess asked again. Maybe he wasn't happy with Lari. But no, she thought again. What was he so unhappy about? Then she remembered and said, "Pervert," to which Tofu began to growl. She was surprised, and said again, and she growled again. She did not understand what was wrong with him. She thought maybe he wanted to protect her so much. Princess Ale thought how cute he was and hugged him tightly. She doesn't understand how it's possible to be so charming. But while the princess was hugging the tofu, she remembered that, anyway, it seemed to her that the chamberlain was not that busy. So she needed to somehow find him and talk to him. After a few days, without waiting for the chamberlain, Princess Ale Tofu and the maid Lari went to the place where he was. When they had already arrived at this place, there were guards at the entrance. One of them stopped them and said that they were not allowed to enter there now. To which the princess replied that he knew who she was. The guards looked at each other doubtfully, and Ale crossed her arms and said they or she needed to tell who she was. They bowed and answered immediately. "Your Highness Princess," Ale told them that so they know her. But why then do not leave, and told them to leave immediately. After the princess told the guards to leave, Tofu started barking at them, and one of the guards yelled at Tofu and asked him what he was doing there. The princess couldn't stand it and slapped the guard. Everyone was very surprised. Ale told him how dare he talk so casually to Tofu. Lady Ale understands that in Korea, such things are simply unacceptable. Before that, when the princess was in the kingdom of Sahad for several days, All the maids there helped her. Laurie does everything alone, but Ale sighed and thought that tofu is much more valuable than all these servants. The princess stroked the tofu. She remembered something, that Laurie and tofu were not originally featured in the book. And the fact that Layla married a representative of the Ren Empire is already radically different from the original version of the story. When the princess maid and tofu approached the chamberlain, there were two more guards standing there. And the chamberlain, who was sitting at the table and drinking tea, he told the maid Laurie that he had already told her that he would personally go to the princess and asked her if she understood something wrong. The maid tried to answer that several days had already passed, but the chamberlain shouted at her that how dare she contradict him. He said that it seemed that she understood little because she had only just arrived at the palace. Ale interrupted him by shouting the word, "Hey!" The chamberlain replied that, "Hey," she told him. "Yes, hey you." To which he replied, "How can she even be a princess? Princess Layla is a very cruel person. She does not think about other feelings and behaves very cruelly. And since she has no support in the Ren Empire, the only way to defeat the chamberlain is this." The lady clenched her fists in anger. Since she had no other choice, she decided to hit him with her head right in the face. So much so that his nose started bleeding. He fell off the chair and started screaming and worrying about his nose. Mr. Chamberlain started shouting that even though she was a princess, he wouldn't leave it like that. Princess Ale angrily asked him who he was. He was just a nobody. She said that he would not tell anyone that it was she who hit him. Not the empress or the emperor. Ale asked if there was some nobleman behind him, and that he should not even hope that she would not find out about it. The main character was very surprised, which was visible on her face, because she knows dark magic well, because in childhood she read about it in books from her father's library, and it was this memory that surfaced. She imagined in her mind a black skull, decorated not with simple feathers, but with magical power that is not so easy to remove. So Liarte is sure that the treatment will not be simple if strong. This is what she decided to tell Mikhail, pulling her hand away from his eyes and telling him with anger on her face that, unfortunately, this is black magic. The girl immediately remembered and imagined in her mind its appearance, namely a mystical eye surrounded by mysterious chains and circles. Then Liarte realized that the spell consisted of 7 seals. Mikhail listened to the heroine's words in surprise, saying that he did not understand how she knew all this, because Duke Elhain could not stand dark magic, which is why. But in fact, the main character knows the answer to the guy's question, but this makes her embarrassed because the first time she won't be able to tell him the whole truth, because she is too shy and doesn't know where to start. Then the girl remembered that as a child, she read forbidden books in the library because in this way she wanted to somehow help her family, who despised her because of her lack of magical powers. Clenching her fist, the main character looked bravely at the blind man and told him that if he didn't start treatment right now, things could only get worse, and so she would immediately begin magic. Mikhail sat with a calm face when the girl put her hand to his forehead, and at that moment he was surrounded by water magic, magical and enchanting, helping him to regain his The heroine also watched what she was doing, because this was her first time creating it. But despite all the shortcomings, she could still control and the boy decided to close his eyes, allowing the powerful force to heal him from the disease, while his head was occupied with thoughts about whether there really was a possessor of such great. The water surrounded him on all sides and seemed to relax him. But in his thoughts, he saw only one bright question in front of him regarding who this sweet. A few seconds later, Liarte informed Mikhail that she had finished the treatment, and immediately after it, the guy unusually touched his face and eyes, as if something had changed in him and different sensations had appeared. Instinctively looking at the heroine, the man told her that it had become a little easier, and she, stretching out her hands to him, said that it would be difficult for his body to endure the removal of all the seals. She put the hood back on her head in order to remain hidden, and turning to the gentleman, informed him that they would now see each other tomorrow and that they should now say goodbye. The man remained sitting relaxed on the blue sofa with his eyes closed, answering the lady that he would certainly wait for her visit, since she was the only one who helped him in this unfriendly castle. As if wanting to unsee the girl's face with his blind eyes at the last moment, Mikhail raised his red eyes in her direction and said that he did not know her name, but he would still see her tomorrow. The main character was about to leave the blonde man's room with slow steps, but she paused, still saying goodbye to the young man in a wary voice and promising him that she would return tomorrow. Mikhail was left alone again. So with one hand, he grabbed the bandage that had previously fallen to the floor in order to feel it with his fingers and think about what he had just experienced. He felt the most unpleasant loneliness because he did not even hear the rustle of the wind or the singing of birds, but everything around him seemed to become lighter and brighter when his head was filled with thoughts of the stranger. The fact is that in a past life, half of the territory of Elhain was mired in a war that every now and then engulfed the beautiful snow-white castle of the Liarte family, as if trying to destroy it, turn it into ashes. And all this happened only thanks to Mikhail Birsche, an experienced military commander who witnessed the entire battle and admired it, smiling like a sly fox, because he is the main enemy of the Duke. Then the Duke, the father of the main character, being in a hopeless situation, told his daughter that only her sacrifice could save them all. Although in fact the whole war. Like a mad king, the spruce-haired dad Liarte told the heroine that only her death would awaken the spirit stone and make her brother stronger. But now that the sad protagonist knows about it, because she has the chance to live her life over again, She realizes with sad eyes that the owner of the water power is not. With such thoughts, the heroine was in her room and, it seems, wanted to be alone. But in her chambers stood a gloomy brother, like a dark cloud, who again probably wanted to mock his sister. The heroine continued to sit royally on the chair when the next day Leon came to her, standing in front of her and clearly wanting to mock her again, admitting that she infuriated him. The girl looked at her stupid but handsome Bharat, realizing that if her father knew that she was the majestic force, he would never have done this to her. But he was only It seemed that in Liarte's blue eyes there was only sadness and indifference to everything. But in her head, she remembered that after coming of age, she would no longer belong to the family, and therefore would leave it. Deciding not to remain silent, the heroine stood up from her chair first and went to her silent brother, asking what happened. And Leon answered her that he came to check on her condition after the recent attack by the killers. But Liarte, who had already lived her first life and knew that her brother would never appreciate her, decided to be cold towards him, only straightening the curls of her hair and asking what business it was of his. The girl's words surprised the Duke's son so much that he looked at her with stunned eyes, not understanding why she had previously risked her life to protect him from murderers, and now was pushing him away. Unable to bear it, he clenched his fist, understanding only that even when she felt better after the great loss of blood, she continued to behave as if he decided not to create a scandal, but only gesticulated with his hand and replied that her health was the most important thing to him. But he did not suspect that the girl just crossed her arms and, looking at him, said that she knew why he was saying that. Namely because without her, he would not be. Leon just pursed his lips because he couldn't answer his sister who had just told him the pure truth. But he still had to continue pretending to be interested in her health condition. Chuckling discontentedly, the gloomy guy told the lady that from now on she could only move around during the day and often walk around the palace grounds so as not to sit in the stuffy room. This was the only thing the guy wanted to say to the young girl, so he hurried out of her room without even saying goodbye, stopping near her door with sad, empty thoughts. He leaned against the door of Liarde's room, not understanding why she had wanted to be useful to everyone all her life, protected him from everyone, and then decided to become so cold that now he too felt uneasy. The boy remembered the very moment when his sister recently sacrificed her life and body to protect him from killers, and then he realized that from that very day, she became completely different. He no longer saw her smiling, sad, or worried about him. On the contrary, in front of him, Liarte only waved her hand and always said that she did not care about. Leon lowered his head and could not understand what had changed her so much and whether it was his fault. But no matter how hard he tried to get to the truth, the facts only said that now she did not want his attention. Gritting his teeth in anger, the guy realized that all this time she had only been pleasing him, and now she had shown her true face, although in fact the girl had only begun to value herself. However, Leon's deep thoughts and anger towards his sister were interrupted by Ain, who suddenly appeared in front of him and called out his brother's name. But Ain appeared before his brother to inform him that the glow of the spirit stone had increased, and so Leon decided to immediately go to the shine. Two brothers appeared near the stone, which in the main character's dreams split and began to shine with a blinding light. But now it is still intact, continuing to hover. Leon looked at his brother with a slightly worried but more saddened look, asking him how long he had been shining like that, because the whole situation with the magical artifact was becoming more suspicious. Gesturing with his hand, Ain answered the brunette that, according to others, the stone had been shining like that since the beginning of the day. After his brother's words, Leon immediately wanted to test the properties of the stone on himself, namely, to try to touch it and look at the changes. But when he extended his hand to it, the mineral did not react. A cold drop of sweat began to run down the guy's face when he tragically realized that the stone did not react even to him, the direct heir to the ducal throne, and just the thought of it frightened him incredibly. While the heroine's brother was anxiously wondering who the stone was reacting to if its presence did not change anything in it, Liarte herself, with a candle in her hand and a cake. It was pitch dark night, and only the moonlight could illuminate the clouds and the earth. And it was the moonlight that helped the main character sneak up. Mikhail was still sitting on his favorite sofa and seemed to be smiling slyly when the stranger who had previously promised to visit him every night for healing appeared in front of him. The strange, unusual noises made him realize that it was not an enemy or a killer in front of him, but a nameless girl. So he greeted her with a smile, greeting her first. The protagonist of the story also greeted Mikhail when she took off her hood and looked at him with her unusually beautiful blue eyes. The girl came closer to the gentleman, and then the blonde asked her if she was tired of calling him that. But the lady only asked again if he meant that she only called him gentleman or by his full name. The girl's hand lightly lifted Mikhail's face to better see his blindness, but he continued to smile at the nameless lady, saying that from now on she would be better off calling him simply by his first name. The main character did not answer because she was very surprised by the man, thereby looking at him with open eyes. But the girl still did as the guy told her. Namely, she agreed to his request and called him by name. She had already removed the bandage from the face of the young gentleman, who could not stop smiling and thinking that most likely his new girlfriend was very cold-blooded or smart. In a dark room with only moonlight illuminating the furniture, the pair had a brief conversation about blindness, with Mikhail telling her that the main character told him that they would remove another seal that night, and immediately after that, her magic shone in the dark room, and she herself closed her eyes while Mikhail looked at her in surprise. The young gentleman's hand began to tremble unusually, as if he was worried or experiencing severe pain, anxiety. She opened her eyes a little wider and looked at his palm, realizing that perhaps the treatment was causing Mikhail slight discomfort that he was trying to hide, but it was manifesting itself in the form of slight tics. Then, in order to quickly calm the worried man, she placed her small palm on his trembling hand, and his anxiety almost immediately disappeared somewhere, as if frowning before the spell, the girl looked resolutely at the guy with blue, shining eyes and firmly told him to trust her. Because the man's red eyes widened even more in surprise because, after this, the kind lady, whose hand constantly touched his cheek, promised him that she would not only be there, but at that moment, the guy felt only lightness and relaxation, warmth, most likely manifested in the form of light crystals of goodness, and he himself could not stop thinking about her fragile palms. Before the hero, there appeared a lady who was fearless towards him, who showed all her magical power of water only for his treatment. But only Liart's words fascinated Mikhail, who was previously cold. He sat in front of her with his head raised, as if trying to unsee even a small part of her magic, or even her herself. But all his efforts. Then, in order not to embarrass the girl with his silence, Mikhail told the girl with a smile that he believed her and would trust her, even if he did not know her. The girl, focused on water magic, continued to control the water with her hand, which could cure the man of blindness, while he himself thought that he had never been so interested in anyone. Just both hands of the silent lady were enough for her sacred element to surround them both, thereby removing one seal from the guy's curse, weakening his blindness, the pain in his eyes. Only when the treatment was completely completed did Madame open her eyes, and with her rich blue eye sockets, as if saturated with magic, look at Mikhail to check on his well-being. She saw a surprised blonde man with red eyes in front of her, but still asked if it had hurt him and how he felt now. Mikhail smiled sheepishly and answered the girl, slightly confused that he felt even better now. But he still couldn't stop thinking that now the lady interested him not as a sorceress or a healer. Unexpectedly for the guy himself, the main character did not rush to leave him, but sat down next to him, which stunned him. But Liarde continued to calmly talk to him, answering that she was afraid that he would be uncomfortable. The lady's behavior made Bercha smile, because everyone treated him with hostility and disdain. But suddenly a young lady appeared who not only did not despise him, but also agreed to heal him from magic. At that moment, he realized that he didn't just want to know her name or anything else, but wanted to look at her with his own healing eyes, see her hair, eyes, and sweet face, smile or hands, and not just see a dark silhouette. This time he only wanted to touch a small lock of her hair, saying that he would definitely repay her for all her kindness and help when she healed him. but he also asked her to tell him her name when she regained her sight. The surprised girl looked at the guy and told him that from the very beginning of their acquaintance, she somehow thought that he had found out everything about her himself, and now she wouldn't even have to say her name or talk about herself. Bringing the girl's black hair to his face, the blonde seemed to want to smell its pleasant aroma, continuing to talk to her, saying that he never found out anything about her for the reason that he didn't want to dig under himself. Liane and Liarte are the direct heirs of the watery, powerful force, and this is known to few, including Mikael, who decided not. This is what he told the young girl, raising his red, dark eyes to her silhouette, also adding that he would deliberately not know anything about her, but would only listen to what she herself would tell him. The boy's sincere words amazed the heroine of the story so much that a slight blush appeared on her cheeks, because she had never felt such care and caution from others, even from her family. The couple continued to talk in the snow-white castle, over which the rays of dawn had already cleared and the darkness of the night was leaving. And Liarte was still polite with the man, promising him that she would tell him about herself. When it became light and the heroine left Mikael, she decided to walk around the palace because this was the only thing her older brother had allowed her to do earlier. But she was heading towards the library in order to learn more. She walked down the corridor with moderate steps and thought that now she needed more information about her own abilities, since treating Mikael required more professionalism. As soon as the heroine began to think about Beach, she immediately imagined his dark, evil shadow behind her. And then the girl realized that she had only heard bad things about him before. The heroine continued walking along the bright corridor, thinking that help for her was increasing anyway, since Mikael himself promised her that he would do everything she wanted. A few minutes later, the protagonist found herself in the library, which she was heading towards, where there were the same bright windows with warm walls. The brunette with blue eyes walked past the shelves with books, looking at them and talking to herself about the fact that she hadn't been here for a long time, namely since the fateful moment that influenced her. The girl remembers that as a child she hid here from those who fiercely hated the unawakened, namely her brothers, who were constantly together and mocked their sister. However, the little heroine finally stopped coming to the library after that incident, which made her feel jokingly scared and believe that no one loved her in the palace, be it her father or brothers. Because of sadness, the heroine remembered the events of that day, when her eternally angry father grabbed her by the hand in order to punish her for her misdeed, although in fact, she only wanted to get knowledge in the library. The girl's sad eyes looked at the floor, and she herself stopped thinking about anything else because the strictness of her father had discouraged. But no matter how sad she was, the desire to learn everything about water magic was stronger. So she began to touch the books one by one with her hand and look at them in order to. The heroine in the blue dress would have continued to take books one by one and rummage through each shelf to find the ones she needed. If the one with snow-white blue hair had. Liarte immediately took notice of him, turning her head and looking at the stranger with shocked eyes, while holding the book in her hand and telling the stranger that, as it turned out, there was a guy with blue hair standing modestly in front of the girl, clearly shy. But despite everything, he still looked at the lady, as if he wanted to tell her something. He had not only blue hair, but also blue eyes, with which he was embarrassed to look at the main character of the story, covering his feigned smile with his hand and only breathe. When the guy got a little closer to the girl, Liarte realized that in front of him stood her old acquaintance, or to be more precise, one of her brothers named Viamin, whom she had not seen for a long. The protagonist of the story imagined herself next to her hated older brother when she began to think that she had not only him, but two more relatives. The oldest of them is Ain, the one who constantly comes to Leon and asks him to look at the stone, the second one with red hair named Tandarian, and also Viamin, the sweetest of them all. The main character, Viamin, is almost an heir, so they often played together, hid in the foliage and enjoyed spending time together, telling secrets. In the past, they were just cheerful children who gave themselves smiles and laughter, were an ordinary, happy boy and girl. However, one day came for Liarte when Viamin called her to the library, where, putting his hands on the table with various books, he told her with a smile that this was a real find and interesting. At that time, the library had very beautiful ornaments. A chandelier decorated the entire room, and it was in this place, which was actually forbidden to outsiders, the blue-haired boy, fascinated by the new knowledge, immediately opened one of the forbidden books, telling his sister that this was the secret knowledge of their family's magic, which was very interesting and educational. But at this time, the children did not even suspect that the Duke was already about to enter the library, the door of which was suspiciously open, and from it came the sounds of children who should not have been there. Entering the secret room, the father saw his dark-haired daughter and son, who immediately looked at him with excitement and shock, because they realized that they were being punished. With eyes wild with anger, the gray-haired old man immediately asked the children firmly who dared to enter here, and moreover start reading books about Ellen's magic, which were forbidden to everyone. A drop of sweat appeared on the heroine's face, but she still didn't look as excited as Viamin, who was clearly shocked and scared to the point that he feared his father's wrath more than anything else. With shaking hands, the boy waved to his dad and abruptly tried to tell him that it wasn't he who had lured his sister into reading the library, that it wasn't he who had brought her here intending to have fun. This made the Duke even angrier, so he just ran his hand over it and asked his youngest son who dared to open the library and climb into it, even without asking the adults and himself. Then the guy decided to frame his sister, who was innocent of everything, pointing at her with a trembling index finger and saying that it was all her fault and that she needed. The boy loudly pronounced her name as if she were the culprit, while the main character herself, confused and shocked, could not even say anything against the accusations, which is why she, with horror on his face and genuine fear, Viamina pointed his finger at his sister and did not hesitate to lie in front of her, saying that it was she who lured him into the library and forced him to read forbidden publications. Liarte herself only looked with devastation and shock at the one who had previously given her bright, incredible emotions, reasons to laugh, happy moments of childhood, and wonderful, heartfelt conversations. The girl looked fearfully at her father, who was already approaching her, and, as the heroine now remembers, he probably knew that she was innocent, because such a fragile and still stupid lady could not even think about books. But he still wanted to make. The father still used magical power on his own daughter, which immediately engulfed her, creating pain throughout her body, which was a cruel punishment for someone. After this incident, the girl constantly avoided Viamin, did not talk to him, but continued to go about her business even when he greeted her and wanted to say something. The boy wanted to ask her about the weather and her health as usual, but after he betrayed her, Liarte only ran away from him, leaving him alone with sadness and devastation in his soul. And now the same man who decided to exchange her friendship and trust for her father's approval stands in front of her and inquires about her condition, still not understanding that Liarte no longer expects anything. The shy boy grabbed his hand and, standing near the column, quietly asked how she was doing, trying in this way to start an awkward dialogue with an old friend, his own sister. But the self-confident main character, who was already holding the book she needed in her hands, looked at her brother with anger and contempt, asking how he dared to show his ugly face in front of her. The girl's words seemed to make Viamin's eyes swim, and his excitement only grew, but he continued to stand and hesitate, asking the lady what she was saying and why she was so unhappy. But in the girl's eyes, there was nothing but confidence that she was doing everything right, because having lived a past life, she remembers that he did not appreciate her kindness, just as he did not appreciate her as a friend. The confused guy with blue hair wanted to ask Liarte about her condition after the recent attack, what they did, but the heroine hastened to leave him, saying that she did not have time. But Viamin was not going to give up so easily, so he put his hand on his chest and turned to the girl again and said that he had made a big mistake in his childhood. But the girl stood her ground, because as soon as the embarrassed guy remembered that fateful moment, she stopped and said loudly that everything was not as he said. Suddenly turning to the boy with an angry look, the girl told him that he was not interested in her condition, but only wanted to get rid of the feeling of guilt, continuing to be an exemplary child in the eyes of his father. In the empty corridor, the lady turned to the boy and said that on that day, as now, he wanted to remain a good boy. And that was why he did such a stupid thing, so that his dad would not punish him. The heroine directed all her accusations at the one who was now standing in front of her and could not do anything. Continuing to listen to a lecture from an old friend about how he only Viamin's whole body trembled from stress, and he himself could not utter a word to the girl, who was already right in everything, and only because of this, the blue-haired aristocrat could not even only after this did the girl with black hair turn her back to him again and cast an indifferent glance, admitting that she did not expect an apology from him, because she was not going to forgive him anyway. The boy, saddened by everything, did not dare to leave so quickly, because he suddenly grabbed her wrist and shouted her name, as if trying to bring back the friendship they had. But the surprise of the already shocked Viamin became even stronger when the black-haired beauty made his hand jump back with one movement of her body, thereby making it clear. Continuing to keep her palm away from her former friend, she looked at him with a sad, empty, and somewhere anxious gaze, repeating once again that the best thing for him was. In the end, the heroine left Viamin with nothing, abandoning and walking away, when he himself looked at her with anger and starch. Still holding, the day quickly turned to night, and so darkness fell again over the palace of the main character and her family, decorated with stars and dark clouds, smoothly floating over the horizon. Mikhail was not sitting idle in the castle, but was already talking to his servant, calmly opening his lips and asking him whether, according to the results of the investigation, Elhein's spirit stone had awakened. The white-haired man with the red blindfold stood calmly, and with his arms crossed, asked the servant if he had told him everything he wanted, and if there was any more important news regarding his enemies. Having bowed, Valto answered his master that everything was exactly so, and that was all that he had managed to find out, secretly staying in the palace and spying on the right people. The two men stood opposite each other when the blond man with the bandage asked the knight for proof of his words, but he replied that he had no proof, but he had been on the brink of death several times. With his head down, the knight silently hoped that his master would accept his words as they were, and not call them lies, because Birch really likes to distrust everyone. While continuing to bow to his master, he had a forced smile on his face and was already thinking that Mikhail would send him out to gather more information again, but he didn't expect that he would only agree with his words. The guy opened his gray eyes in surprise, continuing to stand in a stupor, not understanding why at that very moment Mikhail did not demand more from him, but only accepted his words as an unverified truth. Valto noticed that his master had just sat down on the sofa and told him to send a letter to his father to ask him about the spirit stone. And then the knight realized, however, in front of the servant was not a crazy man, as he might have mistakenly assumed, but the always smiling Mikhail, from whom only calm and slight interest in the awakened relic emanated. Valto noticed this, so he smiled and asked the gentleman if he was in a good mood today, to which the smiling Mikhail replied that he was, because the time of the mysterious stranger's arrival was very soon. The knight with short gray hair immediately imagined in his head that very lady in white who often visits him, and then he realized that she was not only his healer, but a reason to smile and be happier. Valto realized that he should leave so as not to embarrass the couple with his presence, and soon complete darkness fell over the palace, where dark clouds seemed to be fluttering in the wind along with the leaves. The blind gentleman sat quietly in his place and waited for the arrival of the young girl in complete silence, relying only on his hearing and sense of smell, which, fortunately, was. The guy tapped his index finger on his thigh, creating a simple rhythm, under which he expected to hear the long-awaited rustling of the lady, her voice to enjoy her scent of the ocean and purity. But what he heard in front of him was completely different from what he expected, which made him slowly stand up with the same sly grin, as if saying to himself that he just wanted to sit alone and wait for the beauty to arrive. The fact is that the murderers with daggers appeared again in front of the gentleman himself, who intended to cripple him, but the relaxed Mikhail himself walked towards them as if they had come to. The nobleman's hand was already preparing to snatch the sword from its sheath when he thought that this did not look like the work of his enemy, Duke Elhine, which meant that the killers were sent by the one who cursed his eyes. With a slight movement of his hand, he snatched the sword from its holster, showed them its blade, and said with a smile that such a small dagger would be enough for them, because his skill alone was capable of protecting him. In fact, the red, cursed eyes of the gentleman under the bandage were open, and he thought that he should not use magic here because it could attract Elhine, and also he should not take a loud gun. With the firm intention of quietly dealing with the hooligans in black robes, he only began to look at one of them, who was already intending to cripple him, quickly approaching closer and closer. But as soon as the killer even took a swing at the experienced warrior, Mikhail forced him to move away with one strong blow, so that the blondain wouldn't finish him off with another precise blow. Easily dealing with each prankster, the blind gentleman could not stop thinking about who sent them here, and what was the purpose of their customer, if they so strongly intended to kill him. With deft movements of his hand, he made the killers flying at him jump back time after time, but in his head, Mikhail continued to think about his own, realizing that Elhine never loses. While finishing off the last assassin with a quick blow, the blind boy assumed in his thoughts that someone really wanted to make him quarrel with Duke Elhine, and wanted it very badly. But the fight would have remained a fight if Mikhail, who was focused on the battle, had not heard the voice of a girl calling his name behind him, who was standing behind the closed door and was afraid to enter. The gentleman immediately flew to the door and slammed it, saying that he was cleaning the room and she had come a little at the wrong time. But the heroine with the white one, surprised by her behavior, immediately after this, the aristocrat noticed that the people who had previously run at him and tried to at least scratch him with their daggers suddenly froze. And then Mikhail raised his head, not With his blind eyes, Mikhail saw only motionless silhouettes. But this was enough to understand one thing, namely that all the criminals had actually stopped moving, like dolls. Everything became clear to the gentleman when he was able to feel with his body the warmth of the girl's magic, which was already penetrating his room and forcing each hooligan to stand still, while the blonde himself held the dagger in surprise. Turning her head and thus looking out from behind the door, the blue-eyed girl looked at the guy and asked him if everything was okay, as her beautiful face continued to be illuminated by the magical magic of water. Taking off his bandage and looking at the lady with red eyes, together with a sincere smile on his face, the man replied that of course everything was fine with him, and there was no need to worry so much about his condition. Liarte looked out from behind the door, looking at the gentleman who for some reason remained in a good mood, and asking him why he was like this. But the heroine instantly forgot what else she wanted to say to her friend when she looked at his handsome face and noticed something on it that should not have been there. The girl was very surprised by the gentleman's small cut on his cheek, to which she immediately extended her gentle palms with the words that she would definitely heal him when everything was over. Unable to bear the concern, the guy quickly turned away from the girl, blushing more and more with each passing second, because he was enchanted by the attention of the lady, who was only interested in him even in a room full of blood. The grown man even covered his face with his hand out of surprise, shock, and embarrassment, because he felt perfectly well that he was blushing from the mere thought that she was making his heart tremble more and more. After a while, the noise in Mikhail's room became less, and a quiet midnight fell over the palace with a beautiful, dark sky from which the moonlight fell, illuminating the foundations of the castle. But no matter how quiet the atmosphere around was, the blond man in the light shirt still kept his hand on the handle of the dagger, ready to pull it out and telling Liarte that thanks to her, it would be easier to figure things out. He was referring to the three paralyzed ninjas who couldn't even move a finger due to the strong water magic that the main character cast on them, thus making it easier for him to confront them. The main character was left standing behind because Mikhail stood in front of her, preparing a weapon and telling her not to create, as it was dangerous and he would handle everything himself. But what happened next surprised them both, as the ninjas who had previously acted like real people suddenly began to crack as if they were made of stone, like dolls or mannequins, inanimate creatures. The first to notice this was Liarte, who was immediately very surprised, opening her eyes wider and continuing to watch as the killers cracked and collapsed over and over again, which only indicated that they were not real. Then the strange phenomenon was noticed by the gentleman himself, who did not rush to kill them, but only watched as all three hooligans gradually turned into light ash falling to the floor. And the lady in white herself was afraid to move when an inexplicable event, planned by someone, was happening before her, quite frightening, because it wasn't every day that she saw people crumbling onto the sand. Having moved away a little from the mystical, evaporated creatures and shielded them from herself with her hand, the lady told Mikhail that this was no longer her doing, because she herself was surprised by what was happening no less than he was. Coming closer to the ashes that were formed after the people in dark clothes, the girl realized that these were not just their remains, but something strange. She wanted to kneel down to examine the strange ash, which she had never seen before, and which was surely imbued with the same strange, insidious magic, capable of killing or frightening anyone. A drop of sweat from excitement ran down the face of the cute girl with black hair as she continued to peer into the bully's skull, and realized that this was definitely not a curse. Otherwise, there would be letters and strange patterns here. But this was ancient magic that someone had awakened just to cripple Mikhail. Having drawn conclusions, the girl rose to her feet and, turning to the gentleman with the blindfold, firmly told him that she did not. The man lowered his hand to the floor to pick up the fallen dagger, while telling the young lady that he was glad that they were no longer a danger, and that something worse had not happened because of them. As if nothing had happened, the gentleman sat down on his favorite sofa and, sighing, told Liarte that he would send his people to find out what it was. And to this, the heroine said that this was the right decision, and that she needed. Smiling sweetly, she looked at Mikhail and said that if everything was already fine and they were in a calm environment, she would remove the seal from him, thereby continuing the treatment for the curse and blindness. The words of the charming lady slightly embarrassed Mikhail, who was already happy about her visit, so not only a smile appeared on his face, but also a blush. But time passed, and so Liarte immediately got down to the most important thing, and after a few minutes, real, healing water magic reigned between the couple, allowing in front of the blind man's face was a blue, glowing symbol with different patterns and hieroglyphs, while the aristocrat was thinking that the healer had already removed 2 seals, and now 5 remained to be cured. However, no matter how much he wanted to quickly get his sight, get rid of the curse and live a full life, in the beautiful palace far from him, where the sun was gradually rising, in front of the noblemen, the remains of those who had previously had the goal of crippling Mikhail were placed on the floor. And the servant who showed this to his master also said that they were unable to maintain their. In front of the servant sat a relaxed blonde gentleman in the most luxurious robes of all, and with his indifference and monotonous voice, he ordered the guard to simply throw away these remains. The aristocrat with an unusual appearance has the name Lucas Franz, and he is the crown prince of the kingdom in which Mikhail and Liarte are now. But like many others, the red-eyed guy also wants to quickly get rid of the hated Bursch. A servant knelt before the lord on the throne, asking what he would then order to be done with those puppets that had been sent to Duke Elhain, but the prince said that he did not need them. With a sly smile, the prince, who had unusual red eyes, told the servant that according to his plan, the Duke and Mikhail should already suspect each other, and it will be difficult for them to find out who is really behind this. The prince's servant raised his eyes with frightening, unnatural bruises to the aristocrat, saying that they still did not know how things were with Mikhail, and maybe he was already better and not cursed. The prince, in a snow-white suit with red decorations, only looked away thoughtfully and asked the servant if he thought that the Duke and Michael had begun to cooperate rather than fight. To this, the man only bowed to his master and said that he should not worry, since even the strongest aristocrat Elheim could not remove his blindness, which meant that they could not be friends. Then the prince remembered the Duke's son, Leon, who probably possessed the strongest water magic. But Lucas realized that only he could remove his curse for Mikhail, and he needed to visit them immediately. The imperious master looked at the servant with a red eye and ordered him to immediately send his letter to the ducal family, demanding an urgent visit to the Elheims. The next day, when a pleasant, warm light was penetrating the palace of the Liarty family, the entire male part of the Hergtsov aristocracy gathered to discuss the state. The Duke himself, Ain with Leon and Viamin, were sitting at a long table when the elder brother informed everyone present that the stone had begun not only to glow. With a smile on his face, he informed all the men that his awakening would happen very soon, and that this meant that Leon would become much stronger, but no one suspected that only Liarte had the power. There was some excitement and confusion on Viamin's face, as if this was not good news for him, but a reason to be wary. And at this time, it seemed that Leon himself did not imagine himself to be the center of the entire conversation and the most important figure, because his thoughtful appearance suggested that he was thinking not about himself, but about his sister. He remembers the worried maid who turned to him when he asked him about Liarte, where she had gone and who had seen her. But the confused maid seemed to be reluctant to tell the boy anything. But Leon continued to stand confidently next to her, waiting for an answer. And then the girl confessed that the heroine didn't say a word about him, didn't look for him, and didn't. The maid's words were so ingrained in the boy's memory that he himself did not notice how, because of them, he did not pay attention to the fact that his father was calling him. And only his loud voice made him wake up and open his eyes wide. He no longer thought about the changed Liarte, because he turned to his father and asked him what he wanted to tell him, because now he had to worry about family affairs and politics, and not about his little sister. Smiling only towards his sons, the Duke looked kindly at his son and, folding his hands, said that since he would soon come of age, he needed to find a wife, worthy and noble. As soon as the conversation turned to his brother's marriage, Ain immediately took out an envelope from under his jacket, asking Leon to look at it, because this was exactly what he would need in the near future. Taking the letter out of the envelope, Ain solemnly told everyone that this was a message from the Crown Prince himself, who had a desire to visit them in the near future and discuss something important. Ain also added that they could take the chance and ask him to marry his sister, Ninian, to Liana, a beautiful lady with white hair and a pink dress, worthy of being a duchess. But Leon, sad for some reason, only answered his elder brother that he didn't care who his wife would be. So he didn't mind Ninian, who was already good in herself, a pleasant lady and conversationalist. In fact, the brunette had been in contact with Ninian since childhood, and he still remembers how they read a book together under a tree. And then Leon, but no matter how joyful and cheerful a princess like Ninian was in front of him, he still could not help but notice next to her a calm sister who did not interfere in their games. Memories again brought Leon to thoughts about his sister, who, when she was little, was a very sad-looking child. But with her, he felt most at ease, and this thought made his brother feel empty in his soul. But as soon as he remembered his sister's recent look, which only said that Liarte sincerely hated her brother, Leon realized that something in her had changed radically, which hurt his heart. But the whole Leon family did not notice the sad aristocrat, because everyone was only happy with the news of the imminent engagement of the princess to their heir, which would be very good for their politics and position.